Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today is the second part in our series on how to play the French, and we are of course talking about cavalry. Now, one thing I should say before we get started is, although I've called it how to play French, it's not just necessarily the French. There's also stuff in there for, well, any army really, but also in particular any of those French allied nations. So if I say French and you play Italians, just every time I say French, change it with Italian or Westphalians, Württembergers, any of that good stuff. It's similar to them all. Obviously, there's going to be some things that apply to those armies, some things that don't. So take the things that do and just ignore the ones that don't. So I'm going to divide this video into 3.5. I was going to say 4, but it's probably going to be 3.5. So first off, we're going to discuss how to use heavy cavalry. Then we're going to discuss how to use light cavalry. Then we're going to discuss how to use lancers. Now, the half bit comes on because we're also going to be talking about dragoons, who some people say they're medium cavalry. I argue that they're heavy cavalry on the battlefield, particularly of Western Europe, or Eastern Europe. They're definitely more like heavy cavalry. In Spain, it's a little bit different, but when we play Black Powder, they operate, I think, as heavy cavalry. But before we talk about that, we're going to talk about the men in charge. Now, there are some special characters who are particularly good for cavalry. There's not special rules for LaSalle, because obviously there isn't a book that covers his period. But, we can kind of see where we're going with Murat. But, away from the special characters, is it a good idea to pay the extra 25 points to get a strategy 8 general? Obviously, if you're going from an order of battle, you pick dependent on how good you think that general was. But if we're going for points or pickup game, is it worth paying the extra 25 points? Yes, absolutely 100% yes. This is different from the infantry. The infantry, the French infantry anyway, because you're going to be in attack column all the time, you get that +2. Even your free bloke at strategy rating 7, he's going to have a value of 9 when he's ordering that unit. Because there are no formation bonuses, apart from this you're in column of march, but because there's no battle formation bonuses for the cavalry, it's absolutely vital that you have that extra pip of strategy. Remember, it's not just that you're more likely to be able to pass those orders, but you're more likely to be able to pass the orders to give you multiple moves as well. I cannot stress that enough. If you're playing points, I think 25 points to make your brigade commander strategy rating 8 is going to be the best 25 points you ever spend. So, that aside, what do we do with our cavalry when we actually do want them to do stuff? Well, we're going to look at cuirassiers and carabiniers first, the heavy cavalry. This is also, to an extent, going to cover things like grenadier à cheval as well, or Empress dragoons, any of those heavy units that have a lot of hand-to-hand dice, and crucially, a good morale save, because it's the save that makes or breaks cavalry in particular. They've only got 3 stamina, and when they're fighting in combat, the loser always breaks off. So that means that they're a lot more fluid than the infantry. With an infantry unit, you can be shaken, you can be at your stamina 4, 5, 6 turns of fighting and keep on going. Cavalry, that doesn't happen. Once they get to their stamina, they are in serious, serious danger. So, the 3+ save is vital on these guys. That's certainly their best stats. They have a large number of attacks as well. I'm just looking in my copy of Clash of Eagles at the moment. A French cuirassier regiment has 9 attacks, morale 3, and stamina 3 as well. So, they're getting all those dice. One of the downsides for the French, though, is they don't really have any special rules to help them out. Yes, they've got 9 dice, that's very tasty, but they don't really get any rerolls. There's no tough fighter, there's no, what's the British rule called? Frenzied charge, something like that. There's none of that, it's all just, that's it, you've got your 9 dice, you roll them. You should get 6 hits on average. If you're against an enemy unit that has a 4-up save, you should be able to shake them in 1 round of combat. I mean, that's using the averages. Obviously, 1 dice dropped here or there, or an extra hit can change that quite significantly. But largely, you should be able to take out that unit in 1 go. Because you've got a 3+ save, it's unlikely that they can do the same to you. That, again, we're getting to the crucial point here. Cavalry who are shaken are very, very much a liability. They just have to stand there, basically. They can retreat, which is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. That's where that strategy rating of 8 comes in. They can fall back because they're so maneuverable. They can get back into position once you've rallied 1 or 2 hits off them. But you're pretty much always going to be charging on hitting on a 3+. Your enemy's probably going to be counter-charging, hitting you on a 3+ as well. So you are going to take some hits in return. Historically, the strength of the French heavy cavalry was purely in its numbers. They had humongous numbers of them. Take, for instance, in Clash of Eagles, a Russian Cuirassier brigade is 2 regiments of Cuirassiers. Now, that's really important because it means that you only need to destroy one to shake the other one, take the other one out of the game. A French Cuirassier regiment is 3, which means that you need to destroy 2 of those to take the French out of the game. So they really can pile on the supports there as well. Of course, the Russian brigade would only get +1 for its support, whereas the French could possibly get +2 as well. So they're even more likely to win the combat in the first place. That's not really that important, though. The breaking of the brigade is more so. And the reason I say it's not very important is because Cuirassiers shouldn't really struggle to win a combat. Unless they're against other Cuirassiers or better Cuirassiers than them. So, for instance, Saxon Guard Corps or maybe Russian Guard. I'm not sure if there's also Russian Guard. I shall flick through and have a look. Then they should be able to succeed on their own on a regiment-on-regiment basis. I haven't really spoken at the moment about who they should be looking to attack, so I'll do that now. Really, your Cuirassiers are your mailed fist. They've got 2 main opponents that they want to be facing. The first one is the enemy's cavalry. They can bully light cavalry just as much as they can mix it with enemy heavy cavalry. Doesn't really matter who they are. They're there to clear the enemy cavalry from the field if you use them in that role. The other way of using them, and it's how Napoleon used them later in his career, it's maybe a little less, shall we say, tactically flamboyant, but it can be just as effective, is he used them just to smash through the enemy line, create a gap through which the infantry units could flow through. Now that's not always so easy in Black Powder because of the ease of infantry units forming square. They can't always do it, but because the disorder marker comes off at the end of their turn, when it's your turn to charge, it's very, very rare to have enemy units that are disordered. I actually did do a video on why I think there should be an artillery phase at the beginning of the turn, so if you've not seen that, you might want to check that out for a bit more in-depth analysis on that. But that's the second use of them, is to smash through maybe a wavering, shaken, demoralised enemy. That's why Ney sent the Cuirassiers into the charge at Waterloo. He thought the British were shaken and pulling back, but they were just actually getting a better position. Didn't end well for the Cuirassiers in the end. So that's who Cuirassiers want to be looking to fight. They want to be looking to fight enemy heavy cavalry and enemy light cavalry. You can charge them against infantry, but it's not their preferred target. One of the crucial things that Cuirassiers really need to do, though, is they are something of a one-shot weapon. This is really important. I've apologised in real life, but I'm going to make another apology for everyone here to hear to General Dan about this. The first time we ever played Black Powder, it was a big multiplayer game. We had General Andy was there and General Nathan, so it was a cool game. And I said to Dan, like, who do you want to command? Dan was like, I don't mind whoever. So I thought, well, I'll give him something that's simple to use and something that's quite exciting. I'll give him the cavalry. Unfortunately for Dan, he spent most of the game disordered, not being able to do anything, because that single 6 gets through. All right, you've got a 3+ save, you can ping it off, but you're disordered. So the thing is with the cavalry is they need to keep moving. Once you've hit and broken that first enemy unit, maybe you've destroyed them all together, maybe you have to follow up. But once you've sorted them out, you need to then overrun. This is where those extra dice, the 9 dice that they've got, is really, really nice. You can get into that infantry battalion. Even an Austrian infantry battalion doesn't have as many dice as a cavalry regiment. Obviously, if it's from an overrun move, they can't form square as well. There's extra minuses to them in the Clash of Eagles. I'm going to do a whole separate video on that, because I think I hear a lot of comments saying, oh, cavalry don't seem to be very good. And vanilla rules, they're not particularly, not against infantry. I had General Al charged a unit of mine in March. I had charged a unit of General Al's who were in column of march, and they beat my hussars, which was, anyway. So, using the rules that are in Clash of Eagles, cuirassiers absolutely devastate infantry. A little bit too much. A much better use for charging into infantry are the light cavalry, and we'll get into those now. So the light cavalry, we're talking about hussars, we're also talking about chasseurs à cheval, either line or of the guard, and their role really is to harass the enemy. Now, what do I mean by harass? Well, it's a bit of a trite term. It can mean sort of what you want it to mean, really. But in this case, I'm talking about you want to use the light cavalry to try and force your opponent's hand. Again, what does that mean? So what I'm trying to get across here is the light cavalry, so they all have marauder. They don't have to stick together. In fact, I would recommend that you scatter them out across the line a little bit. Not particularly historically accurate, but I think it's the most useful way of using them in Black Powder. What you want to do is you want to be attacking the enemy's light cavalry, particularly if they're lighter than you. So, for instance, Cossacks, or if you want to get around the sides of maybe heavier units, things like that. Infantry are the perfect target for light cavalry. In fact, the light cavalryman's sabre, the curve on the sabre, is designed for killing infantrymen. The way you charge with it, with sort of your wrist, your fingers pointing upwards to the sky, and the curve of the blade pointing towards the ground, the idea of that is it will enter the infantryman's body and go down through the body, through the lungs, the heart, and take them out that way. That's pretty grim, but you know that's what that design is there for. So they were preferred enemy, to use a 40k term, would be infantry. Now in Black Powder it's very easy for infantry to form square. They need to do a command roll as it is now. In the original rulebook it's just not roll a 2 or a 12. It's a bit more difficult these days. But it's still more likely than not that they're going to be able to form square. So you need to use that to your advantage. Unlike the heavy cavalry, the light cavalry can be really effective not getting stuck in. So for instance, I've got my regiment of hussars, and they declare a charge against General Dan's Austrians. They pass their test, they form square. I can redirect, so I go to the unit next to them, and they pass their test, they form square as well. Well, I've now got 2 Austrian squares that I can fire my artillery at, or I can assault with my infantry. If I've done that in the initiative move stage of the turn, I can even charge that turn with my infantry columns at the enemy that's in square already. So it's I haven't had to expose my hussars to take any casualties to do that. Unlike the heavy cavalry, the light cavalry should be able to attack, withdraw, reform, attack somewhere else. You don't necessarily want to see them as a one-shot weapon, although that said, if, for argument's sake, there's a unit of Inniskilling Dragoon Guards in the distance, or Scots Greys, they are going to absolutely maul that unit of hussars, being no doubt about that. But if they've got 2 stamina points on them already, and you can get that third one, effectively taking them out of the battle, maybe even taking the entire brigade out of the battle, that's definitely worth swapping that unit of hussars or chasseurs à cheval for. So be on the lookout for targets of opportunity. The special rule they've got is called Marauder, and I think that's a really good representation of the best use of the French Napoleonic light cavalry, is to use them in that harrying role. Get round the back, start attacking the artillery, things like that. Obviously, you want to try and get round the flanks if possible, but a front-on confrontation with pretty much anyone short of Cossacks, the hussars are probably going to have a bad day. Even against other hussars, it's not going to be great for them. You charge them, they charge you, you've got 6 dice each. You should get 4 hits if you're hitting on a 3. So, you should only take 2 damage. You should be okay to carry on. But 1 bad dice roll and you're taking that 3rd damage, and that takes you out of the game. Not ideal for light cavalry. I would recommend that they try and avoid combat as much as possible. Use them for forcing enemies into square, or you can also use them for following up broken enemies, things like that. So again, that unit of Scots Greys I just mentioned, if they're on 3 stamina, if they've been shaken, then you send the unit of hussars into them to finish them off. You can also do it into wavering or shaken enemy infantry units as well. We don't tend to see that much withdrawing and rallying in Black Powder. It's something that I'd like to see a bit more of. but you just don't normally have the orders to go around, to be honest. So that's how I would recommend that you use light cavalry. Dragoons are somewhere in the middle. Now, something I didn't talk about with the cuirassiers, and I'll talk about it here as with the Dragoons, but it does apply to the cuirassiers as well, is the need to keep them supported. Now, as I said, briefly touched on, the cuirassiers can take brigades of up to 3, so you can have a flank support and a rear support. The Dragoons can be taken in, I mean, you know, French Dragoons, you should have them coming out of your absolute ears. They can be taken in brigades of 4. Now, I wouldn't necessarily take them in a brigade of 4. I'm gonna do a video on how to build better brigades next week, I think, or maybe the week after. I wouldn't necessarily take them in 4, but you can take up to 4. So you can get the maximum supports there. You can get 2 flanks and the rear. You can use them as heavy cavalry. They're very good budget heavy cavalry. Be aware, though, that if cuirassiers are a one-shot weapon, Dragoons, I would say 75% of the time, cuirassiers are a one-shot weapon. I would say 95% of the time, your Dragoons are going to be one-shot weapons against enemy heavy cavalry. They are heavy cavalry. They've got the heavy cavalry D1 special rule, but they're not cuirassiers, and they don't have the furious charge that the British do. So they're going to come out. They're going to be roughly treated most of the time. But if you're doing a points value match game, or if you're doing any Peninsular war game, you're going to have all the Dragoons. And Dragoons, they are good. Don't get me wrong, they're not a bad regiment. If you can get your Dragoons into the enemy's light units, they're going to absolutely wreck face. And that's just purely on the number of dice. The chances are, though, that those Hussars are going to hurt you back in return. So just be aware of that with Dragoons. They're a strong unit. I really like them. They're one of my favourite units in the Napoleonic Wars. But they can be surprisingly fragile. And that's really the story of French cavalry as a whole. There's a term in 40k, or in fantasy we call a glass cannon, and it means they hit really hard, but they're very easy to shatter in return. I wouldn't quite say that for French cavalry, but they're certainly not what the other phrase would be, a tank, so that's they can take loads of damage. You think, well, they've got a 3+ save, they're going to be able to tank up loads of damage. That's not the case either. So you need to be careful with them. You need to use them aggressively, but you need to not throw them away, and you also need to not let them get isolated. Those of you who've seen the infantry video, I said in that if your infantry is not moving forward, you need to ask yourself, why aren't my infantry moving forward? I would say with cavalry, if your cavalry are moving forward, ask yourself, why are they moving forward? Now, it could be so they're in position to charge next turn, or to keep up with the infantry. Those are all valid, useful reasons for doing it. But as long as you've got a reason, not just, well, because they're cavalry, they need to get in combat as soon as possible. If you do that, your units are going to get isolated and they're going to get defeated. Some of you may know I quite enjoy ancient war games as well. And one of the things that the Romans would do, the Republican Romans, is their cavalry would charge right at the start of the battle. The Carthaginians would defeat them, and then the Romans would be without any cavalry support for the rest of the battle. That's how you get Cannae, or the Lake Trasimene, or these absolute massacres of the Romans, was because their cavalry was thrown away right at the beginning of the battle. So try not to throw your cavalry away. Remember, treat them as a one-shot weapon. If you get to use them a second time, that's a fantastic Brucey bonus, but don't expect it. Now we're going to come on to the final troop type that I want to talk about today. We're going to talk about Lancers. Now Lancers are a funny one. They are absolutely a light cavalry regiment. They don't have any of the heavy cavalry special rules, and they do have Marauder. So they are, without doubt, a light cavalry unit, but they hit like a truck. They can hit like a truck. This is one of the big problems with Lancers. They only have 7 attacks, so that's 1 more than the Hussars and Chasseurs, 1 less than Dragoons, 2 less than Cuirassiers. But that -2 to the enemy's morale save can be very, very strong. Now, because it's -2 against cavalry and -1 against infantry, they obviously want to face off against cavalry as much as possible. It means that not only are they more likely to win the fight, it means that they are more likely to get that enemy unit shaken. And remember, that's the crucial part here for cavalry, is they need to get the enemy shaken without being shaken themselves. Because you're both charging, you're both rolling a lot of dice, there's a good chance. So for instance, you go in against enemy Russian Cuirassiers, they've got 9 dice, they're going to hit on 3s, so they're going to hit you, what, 6 times, and you're going to save half of those. You're shaken as well. But what you've done there is you've thrown away a unit of lancers, effectively, or you've sacrificed a unit of lancers to take out some enemy cuirassiers. As I said earlier on, if that's a 2-regiment brigade, which it probably will be, you've taken out a brigade of cuirassiers with that 1 unit of lancers. Definitely a trade-off worth having. Now, here's a little bit of a tactical hint for you. The British cavalry, they always have to overrun. So they've got quite a large leeway to where they overrun to. A little bit too much, in my opinion. But the rules as they stand at the moment, they can go anywhere in their front quarter. So you need to position your lancers in such a way that they can capitalise on that. Move them 18.5 inches away from your unit that's just been destroyed. Let the enemy overrun. They can't reach you because you're half an inch too far away. Then you can countercharge in your turn. Hopefully that British unit will be... I've taken at least 1 or 2 casualties already, and your lancers can then finish them off. You can have them as a way of deterring the enemy from pressing home an attack. That's a really strong use for them. Again, as with the heavy cavalry, they are a one-shot weapon. You want to be using them against the enemy heavies because that's where they get the best use out of their lancers. But the enemy heavies will absolutely tear you a new one. They won't go down without a fight. So either use them against shaken or disordered enemies, or you really, really ideally want to look at it and say, look, I am giving up this unit of lancers, but I'm going to achieve so much more out of it. The other good use for lancers is, of course, against infantry. It's only -1 to infantry for their charge, so that's something to bear in mind. But if you can get in the flank or something like that, that's another strong use of lancers. I would suggest that they don't need the supports that the heavies and the dragoons need, because they're really there, as I say, they're a one-shot weapon, really. They're like a fire-and-forget missile. You fire them at the enemy unit, you die, he dies, everyone dies, but ideally, you've got something more out of that exchange than he has. So that's my recommended use of lancers. That's my recommended use of all the French cavalry. In summary, heavy cavalry, expect it to be a one-shot weapon, but there is a possibility you could get more than one use out of it. Either keep it together and use it as a mailed fist to smash through the enemy cavalry, or keep it as a reserve, again keep it together, and when the enemy infantry start to waver, that's when you can throw the heavy cavalry in. Dragoons, they kind of do that on a budget, so you want to be looking at the same things there. Also be looking for the Dragoons to pick on lighter enemy units, enemy hussars, enemy chevaliers, mounted Jaegers, anything like that. The Dragoons want to be taking apart if they can. British hussars, maybe not. They probably don't want any part of British hussars, but any other kind of hussars, they can absolutely go after. Light cavalry, your hussars, your chasseurs à cheval, they want to be looking at forcing the enemy to make mistakes, -1 to their command rolls, pushing units in to form square, things like that. They can mix it with the enemy cavalry. Ideally, you don't have to. Your dragoons and your cuirassiers have already taken care of them. You can also be looking at flank charging infantry units, possibly even artillery, using them to get around behind the enemy lines, disrupt any rallying attempts, things like that. Just use them to be a nuisance, and remember, the opponent has to basically wipe them out to break the brigade. Finally, lancers, use them as either a one-shot fire-and-forget missile, fire them at the enemy unit, get them out of the game as soon as possible, or hold them back and use them as a counter-attack unit. Either way, they don't necessarily need direct support. They don't need their +1 or +2 to the combat because they're dead anyway, effectively. But they could do with being supported by heavies. You fire them into that unit of Scots Greys, you do 2 casualties, you're destroyed. In your next turn, the cuirassiers follow up and do the extra wounds, maybe getting 3-4 excess casualties and wiping that unit off the map. So that's it. That's the guide to using French cavalry. I'm going to do a broader one on artillery. I'm not just going to do it for French, I'm going to do it for everyone. So stay tuned for that. I'm not sure who we're going to look at next, but I do want to do a video on how to build better brigades. Remember, please, that I do have an affiliate link with the Outpost now. There's a link to that one down below. Also remember that we are releasing short videos on Wednesdays. I've just finished the materials I need for this Wednesdays, So I'm quite looking forward to getting that one done. If you're not sure when episodes and stuff like that are coming out, please subscribe, hit the notification buttons, and YouTube will send you a reminder when I release new content. This Wednesday's was a little bit late due to me getting in late from work. So, you know, it's useful to have that on just to give you the heads up when new videos come out. I've also noticed as well that I've got a huge surge in subscribers this month. I'm not really sure why. Thank you very much to everyone who's recently subscribed. Welcome to the channel. I hope you find stuff on here that you find interesting. I look forward. One of the things I really love reading are new comments on super old videos where someone's like, you said this, and I'm like, possibly, I don't know, it was like 2 years ago. And, you know, what you said was stupid. I'm like, well, it's also highly probable as well. But no, I love reading all those comments. Thank you very much for everyone who's engaging with the channel and things like that. The channel seems to be going from strength to strength, so I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank everyone for watching the videos, liking, subscribing, sharing them, commenting. It's all absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, and I shall see you next time.